Hey, what's the fuss? Tell me what's a happening. This is Pyromaniac Mo coming at you once again for a fantasy football talk. Today is 8/10 and 2015 already, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Matt Waldman. Matt can be found on Twitter at MATTWALDMAN. Of course, he's famous for his RSP, rookie scouting portfolio. Once upon a time, he contributed to the Football Outsiders, and now his energy is primarily devoted to the one and only Football Guys, the Audible podcast we all know and love. Mr. Waldman, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Mo. It's nice to be on. Good to have a nice opportunity to have a chat here and talk a little bit about something that we both, know and love very well, very much.
That's the dating game with the Chuck Woolery dating game. No, fantasy football. We're talking about fantasy football.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. Though I think we, Chuck Woolery. I did have a few summers where I'd spend my time on my dad's couch while he was at work watching some Chuck Woolery. So sad to say, but I think that dates both of us, doesn't it?
Well, we're going to take a little bit longer than 2 and 2. So we're going to dive into it here. So I've been a longtime fan of you, but how can the Pyromaniacs and some of our football fans find you out in the fantasy football world these days?
Well, I appreciate it. Other than, sending smoke signals and on Morse code, you can find me on Twitter as you mentioned, and you mentioned that there, but also you can find me at www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. And I probably post something 3 to 5 times a week on the RSP. You can also find my work at the RSP Film Room. Just type that up on YouTube and you can subscribe for free and get, so far I have over 50 Film Room Google Hangouts with various guests watching tape together of various college prospects, as well as something that I'm doing that's new, which are more 8 to 10 minute Google Hangouts that are actually more like 8 to 10 minute videos that I'm just putting up there with that are well produced and, kind of go with music and diagrams of looking at players and how they're performing in terms of, college prospects. The most recent one was on Laquan Treadwell. And I looked at, probably 5 different plays of him getting off press coverage and talking about the importance of that type of technique for a young receiver. Then, of course, you can, you always can find my gut check column, which is available at footballguys.com. And I do that weekly. And I would say, every once in a while, I've been doing some work with Ross Tucker on his podcast. And you'll occasionally hear me on a variety of great podcasts, including this one, which I'm excited to, get a chance to do.
Hey, in my opinion, it's all about, breaking down walls in this fantasy world that we all know and love. We shouldn't be in competition with one another. We should be, celebrating one another and pulling one another up. And I've seen some of the aforementioned videos that you're mentioning, and it's really cool, guys, because the Pyromaniacs out there, if you haven't seen it, Matt brings up some really pointed, cool facts, very in-depth facts, and then actually shows you the video of what he's talking about. Now, Matt, one of the things we try to do at Pyro is pull back the curtain, as it were. There are a myriad amount of resources out there. But what's one, maybe 2 things that you try to use and incorporate into fantasy football? What's some data points, some resources that you visit during the season?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, I used to be very data heavy when I first started out as a fantasy analyst. And then the more that I've got into watching tape and studying the game, the more I look into the cause and effect of what I see on the field and try to narrow that down. So I've become a little bit more film focused than data focused as time has progressed over the course of my career writing. But some of the places that I look at, I mean, Chase Stewart does really a great job with data at footballperspective.com, and I would certainly recommend his site highly. I think that he does a fantastic job of looking at data and keeping it in a context where you can actually glean some really salient points from it. I would also recommend from more of the film side, and I would recommend two sites that I really enjoy. One is obviously Smart Football from Chris Brown's site, which is, hugely popular. He's on Grantland. But he's someone that does a nice job of explaining the game and giving you an understanding of how strategy plays into decision making for the individual players. And it's important to understand that context when you're looking at data. Otherwise it may not fit. That data could be overfit in some ways that it may sound promising, but you're going to end up sometimes being right for the wrong reasons, or wrong for looking at something that isn't, really a complete way. And then I would say Emery Hunt, he has a really nice site. He's also a colleague of mine who does a lot of draft and football work and breaking down X and O's. And Emery is a former running back at Louisiana Lafayette. And he is someone that does fantastic work out there with video, breaking down games, giving previews, and just, again, educating people about the sport. And I think that, to me, that's one of the things that I really find enjoyable is, getting a chance to look at those guys' work and kind of seeing how they deconstruct everything about this game.
I second that with Chase Stewart. He's done some fabulous stuff, really interesting ways he views the data. And as the oracle at Delphi once referred to Socrates as the wisest man on earth because he had the greatest capacity to learn, because he admitted he knew nothing. I've not heard of Chris Brown and Emery Hunt, so I will definitely check those guys out. Moving on to something you've really made a name for yourself with, and it's very impressive, is the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, also referred to as the RSP. Pyromaniacs, I've picked one up myself. Not only is it worth it, but I would even say the post-draft version alone is worth the coin. Matt does an amazing job of really diving in, and then that the post-draft version talks about the camp battles that are going to be coming up, how the running backs or whomever is going to fit with the system. It is worth its weight in gold. It's fantastic. Matt, speaking of some of these camp battles, now that we've started to see some guys compete, we've got a glimpse of some of the depth charts. Running backs specifically, who dramatically improved their draft day stock just because of the position, just because of the team they were drafted by? Who were you liking?
I think a guy that stands out from that standpoint more than anyone probably is Matt Jones with Washington. And the reason that I'd say that is that Jones, to me, was an intriguing pickup for a team because you could see the size, the burst. He certainly has the power, and you could see where his decision making was on a trajectory where he could get better at the nuances of how to run between the tackles and do it effectively at a pro level. So, you got the base physical skills to play the game at a high level as a running back, and then you see signs of the decision making where it could improve. The fact that Washington moved up to get him, and its new GM, who is pretty much known, I can't remember his last name to save my life all the time, but his first name was Scott. But he was with the 49ers. He was credited for building what the Seahawks have today, with a lot of the work that he did there. And he has an interesting story as well, and you can probably find Washington's GM, you can type that in, put ESPN story, and you'll find a great feature story on really his road back to becoming someone who is at a front office in football. And this is a guy with a great pedigree, and he pretty much reached to get Matt Jones because he believed in what he saw there. He saw a guy who he believed down the line might be able to offer similar traits to what Marshawn Lynch provides. Now, I find that I'm a little skeptical of that myself, but I think that Matt Jones offers maybe a little bit more upside than what a guy like Michael Bush Bush was with the Raiders and giving you, low end fantasy one production when Darren McFadden got hurt. I think that Matt Jones has that type of potential for the team. And Alfred Morris, his contract is I believe he's in his last year this year or next year. So it's not very long from now where Jones is going to get his opportunity. And I would say physically, he's probably the most impressive running back as a power back on that depth chart.
Yeah, folks, Matt Jones going with the Fantasy Pros ADP, pretty much going undrafted if you are in 12-man leagues, 16 rounds. He's going 69th running back overall as of today, 221st overall. I picked him in my dynasty. I do have Alf, and been a lot of great hype. I mean, you got to take it with a grain of salt this time of year. A lot of great hype coming out about Matt Jones. Some other running backs that perhaps fell into a good situation. One in particular I want to ask you about, the Ravens. A lot of my Pyro brethren really in love with Buck Allen, feeling as though he's going to impact Forset's playing time. How do you see Buck Allen, not in Dynasty, but in redraft leagues this year in comparison with Forset?
I'm a Forset fan. I believe that Forset has his job nailed down, and I think it's going to take an injury and Buck Allen to just play really well as a rookie in that time to force any type of a committee split. Forset proved beyond a shadow of a doubt last year that he could handle the load, and he's at this very rare intersection for a running back, or really any player in general. Because when you think about running back play, most of the time their careers start to go towards a descent in production and athleticism after age 28, 29. I mean, there are very glaring exceptions to that, but you tend to see that happen. But at the same time, as football players get older, their knowledge gets deeper, and they are able to recognize things more. So, with your top athletes, as they're athletically declining, their conceptual skills for the game tend to be increasing, and there is going to be a nice sweet spot where they still play well and they have that kind of sunset in their careers where they hold out. But Forset doesn't have a lot of mileage because he never really was a starter. He split time with Julius Jones and Edgerrin James in Seattle early in his career, and then he bounced around the league, played a little bit with Houston, but was never a starter. He was just more of a change of pace back. So he has low mileage, but now he's been around the league long enough that conceptually he's, a grizzled veteran in a body of a player who still has a lot left in his legs and hasn't taken a lot of punishment. So Buck Allen, to me, is a player that is going to be competing with Lorenzo Taliaferro for playing time. And, some of the things I'm hearing is that Taliaferro will probably be the goal line option, with Buck Allen having the advantage as a third down change of pace guy, also filling in, in that realm. So it could be a backfield split if Forset were to get hurt, or it may be a very situational substitution type of scenario for both Taliaferro and Buck Allen, where their carries aren't really enough as one player to have that kind of fantasy impact as a reserve or a change of pace guy. I like Allen. I think that I don't think he's a top end athlete, but you see moments where he has, there's moments I've seen on film where he has burst where I feel like you can see that starter burst. He does everything well, but he doesn't do anything great. And I think that that's where we're going to see what I'm looking for is his progression down the line. Is he going to get, can he get his burst to a point where it's good enough that he can then, continue to develop his vision in a way where he's a great fit for a specific system? And I think that This system looks for all-around players. Mark Trestman tends to value guys who can run in a zone scheme, who can, catch the ball in the backfield, who can pass protect, and Allen can do all those things. I just don't know if he has any specific special trait that's going to make him a long-term starter in the league. But there was a player who he reminded me of who kind of fit that as well when I first saw him at the University of Georgia, and that was Terrell Davis. So Terrell Davis certainly turned into a special player, and you could see some of the I see some elements with Buck Allen where you could project him developing into a manner where he becomes a decent starter in this league. But I think that if you were going to compare him with somebody, the very highest end, everything comes together, in the best possible way, Terrell Davis would be the guy that would be his ceiling. And then I would say that his more likely scenario is more of a guy like Chester Taylor, who's a fine back, and I'm sure you're very familiar with him, being up in the Michigan area. But Chester Taylor was a fine back, but a guy that could get you 1,300 yards and a good offense like the one that he was in Minnesota, but not somebody long term that was going to be that starter, that he was always going to be looking over his shoulder. As a starter, but most likely that first tier backup who could do a good job for you when called upon.
Yeah, speaking of Chase Stewart, he did some really interesting numbers crunching. I brought this up on episode 1 of the Pyro Light, but essentially there were 19 backs last season who recorded at least 100 carries, and they averaged better than 4.16, which was the league average. You'd have to take away 9 of 4 sets top rushes for him to even come near that mark. That was the best in the league. A lot of guys, I just don't think they give him credit. Like you said, he's got a lot of tread on the tires. I really think under Trestman, he's going to see some improvement in the passing game, and he can bust off big runs as well as get it done in the goal line. All 8 of Forseth's rushing TDs came in the red zone. Not to mention, he busted off 18 runs that went for 15 yards or more. That was tied for second in the NFL. And out of backs that accumulated at least 25% of their team's carries, he had the best breakaway. He had a breakaway percentage of 41.7. I mean, I just think that is fantastic. I think people look over him for his age, and he's never done it before. I think he's going to continue to do it, and I think Trestman is going to only fuel the fire there. One other guy I wanted to ask you about, a running back, and it's one of my sleeper picks, is Mike Davis, San Francisco guy. What do you think of his situation?
Yeah, and I'll definitely talk about that. I love the points he brought up about Forseth, though, just as a quick aside. And I think that also speaks a lot to how strong the Baltimore Ravens offensive line really is, and how much it's improved, because a couple of years before, when Ray Rice was hurt, that line was also banged up. It got healthy last year, and you saw what it was able to do and what Forseth was able to do. So I think that, this is one of the stronger offensive lines in the league. And when you have a quarterback who is willing to get aggressive and go deep, and he has a player like Steve Smith, who, announced his retirement, this will be his swan song this year. I still think that's, you still have the nice dynamic to open up rushing lanes for a running back. Now, Mike Davis, certainly like Mike Davis, I think that he's probably one of the more intriguing rookies in this running back draft class, which is a rich one. He's not a guy I think that is going to do much this year unless there is an injury. And the reason being is that, Carlos Hyde held his own pretty well last year, and he looked good. And I think that he's going to continue to build on last year in terms of what he's capable of. It's just a matter of whether San Francisco offers the similar type of dynamics as an offense and as a total team, to be able to support a running game at the level that it has in the past. And what I'm talking about is that, San Francisco lost 2 offensive linemen. They've lost pretty much its entire core of linebackers, and it's one of its best defensive ends to retirement and to to retirement and injury and to off-field issues. It's also lost a safety to early retirement. So this defense could be in for a pounding this year and may put the team behind in a matter where the game script, something that Chase Stewart often talks about in his articles as well, the game script could be tilted more towards pass than it has been in previous seasons. So that may take away a little bit from the luster of having any running back in San Francisco. But that said, Mike Davis, to me, you're looking at a guy who in 2013 was probably one of the better prospects in this draft. He's a very physical running back with excellent burst. He doesn't have great top end speed, but that's not as important for a running back. Most teams, you'll hear them clamor for a guy who can run, a sub 4, a 4.4 or sub 4.4 40, but they use these running backs in ways where it's the analogy scouts often joke about is that my team wants a Ferrari, but they're going to use them like a Camry, and I think that that's often the case with running backs. And so Mike Davis is perfectly suited for, playing between the tackles, also getting them out in space on as a pass receiver. He's a good blocker. The problem was that in 2014, he was dinged up a little bit. He also came into camp a little bit out of shape, so he's a little overweight. And there were teams that were very much split on him. Some felt like that this is the beginning of the end for him for some reason. They felt like he wasn't in shape, maybe that the injuries have gotten to him. There are other teams that were like, it was just a one bad year. He's going to be fine, and he's a bargain for any team that picks him. I tend to side more on the bargain end of the spectrum, and I think that he can offer what Carlos Hyde offers right now without much drop off, as once he gets acclimated to their system and to the speed of the game, which takes a little time for any rookie. And if Reggie Bush was a fine player, but it's hard to imagine him rebounding or having any type of career renaissance at this stage. I think that he's more of a situational player. And Kendall Hunter is, 2-3 years, I think, removed from an Achilles injury. It's hard to tell whether or not he really offers that same type of thing. So I think that Davis is in a good situation where that if Hyde gets hurt or underperforms, that he could earn a shot. And I understand why you would see him as a potential sleeper, even in redraft leagues that you can take very late. And if it doesn't work out early on, you can use him as a waiver wire bullet and pick somebody else up.
Well, he's got some good numbers coming out of college. And my fear, I've done a long comparison with Carlos Hyde and Latavius Murray. Basically, they come down 83 carries for Hyde, 82 for Murray. 4 yards a carry for Hyde, 5.2 for Murray. On games where they got the double-digit carries, Hyde averaged 2.67 yards per carry, Murray 3.8. Hyde's breakaway percentage, 17.4, Murray 53.3. Hyde's longest run was 27 yards. He only had one that went for over 20. Murray had 4. Murray had 8 for over 15. I just think, looking at the two, Murray is hands down the winner, and yet Hyde is going for more. Not to mention, like you say, they're really gonna suffer. They've lost so many guys on defense. Plus, they've taken a big hit on offense. Like you say, right tackle Anthony Davis, he retires. He may be coming back, but he was arguably top 15. Pro Football Focus rated him as 13th best run blocking tackle. Iapati's going to Arizona. It's just not going to be the same thing that we once saw. And they're starting to incorporate more of a zone blocking scheme. And John Tuvey from the Huddle does a great job explaining how a team moving into zone blocking, it's going to take 7-8 games for that offensive line to really click. So I hear you that I think Davis could be a guy in the future, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's sooner. I mean, towards the end of the season. But I'm very leery of Hyde and certainly hyped up on Davis. Going back to your RSP, the rookie scouting portfolio, which you do a fantastic job with. I can't say enough about it, Pyromaniacs. It's just fantastic, the amount of work Mr. Waldman has done. What about some wide receivers that you feel fell into a good situation, or maybe you like them better after they landed on the team that they did?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that there are a lot of players that I really liked. So, I mean, for instance, I'll give you a couple. There's one player like Devin Funchess. I wasn't a huge Devin Funchess fan, but I think that he landed in the ideal situation for him to have the kind of production that maybe Michigan fans would expect from him if they were fans of what Funchess was able to do while he was there. Funchess being a bigger receiver, certainly someone who maybe you could argue that he could maybe fulfill a hybrid tight end role. But to me, he's a guy that, you put him on a fade route, you put him on a corner route, you put him somewhere along the sideline, and he can win passes that are, contested plays. Get him running away from the quarterback where he's going to have to make the catch with his back to the quarterback. I think he struggles a little bit. I don't think he has that great quickness in and out of breaks to be, a West Coast offense route runner. He's he's more of going to use his size. But I think in an offense with Cam Newton, opposite a guy like Kelvin Benjamin and what we saw with Kelvin Benjamin last year, Funchess could be that guy that they can move around a bit. They can find good matchups for him. And with a guy like Greg Olsen at tight end, who's capable of making defenses pay for not paying attention to him enough, that gives Funchess a really nice opportunity to do well this year and down the line in the future. I think that Chris Conley, the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver who was drafted out of Georgia, found a really good situation because he's not, he was a combine darling. He had one of the better combine performances this winter. He didn't have great production at Georgia, but he was in a really much a run first system but he displayed some really nice skills when he was targeted. He's a very good fade route player. He's got, great vertical leap, good speed, someone who catches the ball well, practices hard. He's also a very smart individual, great leader, someone who does a lot of outside work, community work, and he's someone that has already made a good impression in Kansas City. And I think that while Alex Smith isn't the love of fantasy football owners when it comes to quarterbacks, he's a guy that he's going to get the ball where it needs to be when a receiver is doing his job. This is the opposite of, I would say, a Kelvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess offense. Andy Reid's offenses are very much about precision and being reliable and consistent. And so a guy like Jeremy Maclin is a really good pick for the Chiefs when they added him to this roster to replace Dwayne Bowe, who's much more of a 50-50, use my physicality to win catches, but not always be consistent enough for a quarterback like Alex Smith, whose strength, and it isn't a great strength, but his strength is, like, again, to give you intellectually what it is that you're expecting from a quarterback and being consistent with it. Conley gives you a little bit of that physical dimension to win passes, but he also is a guy that is showing enough on film that he can become a precise route runner. So I think that his situation long term is a very good one. And then I would say then after that, another one who probably has benefited from his situation early on would probably be Nelson Aguilar. I really like Nelson Aguilar as a talent, and had him as rated very highly as a talent. So I would have felt like he was going to do well no matter where he went. But in this Eagles offense, he's going to get a shot right from the beginning to be a starter. He should win the job from Josh Huff, and he's already getting first team reps and impressing the coaching staff. He's very quick. There's a lot of Odell Beckham-like qualities to Nelson Aguilar. He doesn't have the out-of-this-world adjustments to the football, but he has that quick twitch athleticism after the catch. He's tough enough to make tight plays in contested situations, and he's a good route runner, and he can play in the slot or outside for you. So I think that that's a very good scenario for him. And then I'll just mention I'll mention a third one that he's a guy that I like, and I know a lot of people probably are waiting to see, but I think Dorial Green-Beckham is probably the most just pure physical talent of this class as a wide receiver. And when you look at what he can do with his size and speed and ability to win in tight coverage, a lot of people say, well, he only ran a limited number of routes. He didn't show all the route running you need to see. But from what I saw on tape, I saw a guy who could bend well, who was agile enough to make some of those hard cuts that you need from a route runner who's going to work the middle of the field and also work the short and intermediate range and not just run 9 routes and go deep all the time. But when he does that, you can put 2 guys on him and he's still going to climb over them and win the ball. And he's getting starter reps in Tennessee. Part of it's a reward apparently for working hard and improving after coming into camp a little overweight,
Yeah.
And having some drops. But let's remember a couple of things with these guys, because I very much look at storylines and I study these guys a lot. I mean, these guys are in their early 20s, and a guy who already weighs 235 pounds and is 6'6" or 6'4", 235. It's going to be easy to put on a few pounds between OTAs and training camp. And your first year can be a little bit overwhelming as it is. So I'm not too worried about coming in 10 to 15 pounds overweight when guys like at that age and their metabolism can drop that weight like it's nothing. It's just a matter of if they're really consistently going to work hard or not. And I can understand why people are worried about him based on some of his past issues off the field. But he worked hard all during the season at Oklahoma, was beating people at Oklahoma in practices. And his coach is this gentleman. I'm going to pimp his book, actually. It's called The Complete Wide Receiver by Jay Norvell. Jay Norvell is a longtime wide receiver coach who just left Oklahoma, but he coached the likes of Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, Jerome Pathon, Ryan Broyles, Jerry Rice, Tim Brown. He's had stints obviously with the Colts and the Raiders, and it's an excellent book. I had a scout ask me if I had read the book about 2 or 3 years ago because he looked at my wide receiver observations about certain skill sets, and I was talking kind of the same language with this guy. But even though I happened to luck into doing hours of film study and seeing some of the similar things, this book has been really it's been a great read this summer. That's both been a learning experience and small amounts of validation, as I referenced. But Norvell coached Dorial Green-Beckham, and he's mentioned this offseason that Green-Beckham will be a better NFL player than he was a college player, not only because of the time missed and the time that he'll make up actually being in the NFL, but because of his physical style and his skill sets lend better to a physical game in the league. And I think Norvell would know better than anybody. So to me, I'm very high on the situation, even if I'm not a huge fan of Marcus Mariota. I do think that Green-Beckham is going to be a mainstay in this league as long as he gets it. He's mature enough and learned his lessons that he needs to, make sure that he keeps out of situations where he's going to make bad decisions.
Well, I like what you say with Beckham. A lot of people were worried about coming into camp overweight. Like you say, his metabolism, and the longer these guys are in the league, they do know how to take care of their bodies. A couple things that you mentioned, I am 100% agreement with Aggie. I think Chip Kelly is going to just know what to do with that guy. He is one of the best route runners we've seen in quite some time. And I want to pick your brain a little bit here on Funches. For being as skilled as you are and having us watched as much film, I mean, I love the fact that we've got the Twin Towers there. But I was talking with David T. Thomas, longtime NFL scout, and one of his criticisms of Funchess was for being as tall as he is. He went up against average cornerbacks of 5'10", and he had And I've got two stats from him, but basically 15 to 22 passes. Now, I think he had 22 passes batted down, and perhaps 15 were batted down by guys smaller than him. I'm sure I might have that number a little bit wrong, but it's anywhere from 15 to 22 passes batted down, according to David T. Thomas, from cornerbacks. Did you see the want to? Can he high point the ball? Does he have that Stevie fists, gumption to go get it no matter what?
He does have. That's kind of speaks to the point that I made a little bit earlier with Funchess, and I'll make this point fairly clear. I was not a fan of Funchess. I think that when, the question to me, the question that you asked was who benefited most from their landing spot.
Right.
When I look at talent in terms of where he could go and play anywhere, Devin Funchess would not be high on my list. But to put him in Carolina, the reason I say that is that I think Funchess is the type of player that if you get him to where he can be in a position to post up on a corner and use his height, he wins. If you ask him to have his back to the quarterback and then have to turn around to have to catch the ball over his shoulder, he doesn't track the ball as well. If he has to deal with a safety coming down over the top and he's running away from a cornerback or running stride for stride, he struggled in that department. But if you're like one-on-one on the sideline, he can get his back and post up, he can win that. Get him on a hook route or a curl and he can turn around and use his body to box out, that's fine. But ask him to be that primary guy who's going to win it and no matter what, no, I would not classify Devin Funchess in that area. But I would say with what I think Cam Newton's a good, solid starter in the NFL with upside, and what he's able to do and what they've got in that offense right now will benefit Funchess because, a guy like Corey Philly Brown showed enough this past year in glimpses that he can be a deep threat for them and catch the ball with his back to the quarterback. Kelvin Benjamin can do that. So can Greg Olsen. You've got three guys on the field who are capable of doing that. You can put Funchess in the high leverage situations and get a good bit of production out of him. And enough that I think that he could be, a good bye week receiver for you or a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 for you this year in leagues that start that many receivers.
So once again, Pyromaniacs, we're talking to Matt Waldman, particularly about his rookie scouting portfolio, which again is just fantastic, especially the post-draft analysis, where he looks specifically at where guys went and how they are going to fare. So we looked at some pros. We looked at some positive guys. Matt Jones in Washington, Funchess, Aggie, DGB. What about on the flip side, Mr. Waldman? What about some guys, Langford comes to mind behind Forte. Now, I have heard a fringe element out there say that Forte is maybe running out of gas, but the majority would say we're not going to see much of Langford. His stock plummeted pretty much. What about the flip side? What are some guys, wide receivers or running backs, that maybe you like less now that they are on the team that drafted them?
Well, I think that to start with a guy, Jalen Strong in Houston, I certainly like the potential he has, but it's going to take a little bit longer for him to get an opportunity. And I think that with the quarterback situation as it stands right now, Brian Hoyer is far and away the best quarterback on that team, and he has the least physical skill of the three signal callers. So that's a situation where he's not a long ball thrower. Jalen Strong has to, the fact that he's lost as much weight as he has to try and improve his speed is kind of a red flag to me. That tells me that, you're looking at I always saw him as more of a Keyshawn Johnson type of player, like early in Keyshawn's career with the Jets, and even with the Tampa Bay Bucks, he could win on play action post routes. He could win on routes that are longer developing as a vertical player, but he's more of your short and intermediate game receiver who gets a high volume, and Strong, I think, is that type of player. but it's going to take him a little bit of time probably to fit in on this team. And I think the quarterback situation does make it a little bit more difficult. Devin Smith in New York, and I don't think it's because of the New York Jets and Geno Smith. I think that Chan Gailey is actually a nice add, and I think that Todd Bowles is also a nice add as the coach. And I think that this team can improve, and I think that there's still a little bit left for Geno Smith to be able to show the world that he is capable of being a starter in this league. I was never really high on Smith, but I didn't think that I thought last year he showed flashes of goodness, even in a very dysfunctional Rex Ryan regime when it comes to offensive play. And so when I look at somebody like Devin Smith, he's going to be sitting behind, Eric Decker and Brandon Marshall. There's Jeremy Curley, who's still a pretty decent veteran in the slot. And Smith is being asked to learn 3 different positions right away, rather than just get good at one. And then you throw in the injury too. But even before the injury, I think that was a bit of an issue. I didn't particularly, I'm more of about a talent guy than I am about situation. So long term, I still love Kenny Bell, the wide receiver for Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that he is going to develop into a really nice wide receiver too once Vincent Jackson parts ways with Tampa Bay. But right now he's competing for the 3rd spot, and he's doing well enough in camp that he may end up earning it. But Tampa Bay, and I like the combination with him and Jameis Winston, but I think that it's a situation where it may take him a little bit longer now because of the fact that he is, he's going to be behind 2 very good starters right now in the league. And then I'd say for fantasy purposes this year, Kevin White headlines the list as a guy that is very talented, and I think that will eventually perform extremely well and might end up being, I still think he's the best wide receiver and prospect in this class long term. But it's a run first system. It's also going to be, John Fox is kind of wary of starting wide receivers who are rookies, and you have a veteran in Eddie Royal who knows Adam Gase's system. And of course, Alshon Jeffrey is the primary guy, and Martellus Bennett is still, playing as well as he does. And then you've got Matt Forte catching passes out of the backfield. So from a wide receiver standpoint, those are guys that I think didn't benefit as well. I would say Tevin Coleman is a guy that a lot of people are split on. I'm not a fan of Tevin Coleman. I've never been a fan of Tevin Coleman's game, even though from the standpoint of scheme, people would note, and they would be very accurate in saying Tevin Coleman ran an outside zone scheme at Indiana, and he's going to a team that is now running the outside zone in Atlanta. But if you look at Tevin Coleman's game up close and you watch the physical the biomechanical style that he has as a runner, it doesn't match very well, in my opinion, to an outside zone scheme at the higher level of athleticism that you're going to see demanded of him against pros. Because when you run his hips are very straight, not bent in a way that you see from runners who can maximize their power. You got to run with your hips bent, with your knees bent, with your pads low, but in a way where your pads aren't, lopsided like this. You got to have your head up when you run. Tevin Coleman doesn't do those things. He's more of a guy that hits a hole very hard, very fast, makes one decision, can't make multiple cuts. He's more of a guy that can make one cut and go, but it's in a way where it's not a sudden short space type of cut. It's more that having to either gear down to make that play. And when he does hit a hole or hit a crease, he can generate power through that momentum, but that's more in the second level. When you're running a zone scheme, you have to be able to change direction multiple times if you need be. You need to be creative in a level where you are, you can break tackles without generating a lot of momentum downhill. And when he runs with his head down, when he has to get a burst of speed to be able to generate that power, when he can't change a lot of direction, that's more akin to what what a runner does to succeed in a gap style scheme where you just hit that one crease, hit it hard, use that great speed. But you have to be shifty, creative, and powerful in a way where you can use that functional power. And when your hips are not bent, you can't use that natural strength you might have lifting weights to really transfer that into running back power, to push a pile, to run through a tackle. And so when I see him, as a lot of people saying, metrics wise, he looks great. His stats looked great from a carry to carry basis. He was a boom bust runner at Indiana. I think he's going to be even more of a boom bust runner in Atlanta. And you're going to see a guy who compares much more to Darren McFadden than to DeMarco Murray when it comes to his skill set. So I think that's going to be a hard fit for him. Then I would probably also add that, a guy like a guy like Malcolm Brown, who was a late round pick. A lot of people probably don't even think about him, but he was a 5-star prospect at Texas. And I think that he's a very underrated player who had one of the better combine performances, actually, when you look at his overall numbers. And he is a very savvy zone runner who can catch and pass protect, who played behind an offensive line that had a career total starts of 18 games to begin the season before that center, who had all but one of those starts, got hurt after the first week. So he was never able to build on a decent junior campaign. And as a senior, he struggled behind a really bad, inexperienced Texas offensive line. And even when you watch his games and watch the traits that you're looking for from a running back, the decision making, the physicality, it was all there. So he's stuck in St. Louis behind Todd Gurley and Trey Mason and Benny Cunningham. I think that he's going to get cut after getting enough carries, because Gurley isn't probably going to see a lot of preseason looks, but he'll get enough carries for another team to look at him and maybe benefit somewhere else as a guy who bounces to a new team, a la Joique Bell did, in his past.
Wow. So guys that wound up in good situations, to recap for my Pyromaniacs, you're liking, I forgot to write down some of the names, but Matt Jones, Funchess, Aggie, DGB, guys that did not end up in some good spots. Jalen Strong, Devin Smith, Coleman, and even a Malcolm Brown in St. Louis. Coleman's an interesting name. I have not seen so many guys split on him. I have seen guys that say this is going to be great for the system they're running there. I've seen guys that say that this is not going to work there. And I want to believe in him just because I saw what Devontae Freeman did, and I'm not a Devontae Freeman guy. I think when you've got twin duo receivers that are going to keep the defense honest, like you have with Julio and Roddy, I think the situation is ripe. So I want to believe in Coleman, but I know he's not fast, and like you say, he might not fit with the system.
I will add with Freeman, the thing that Freeman is hard to get a fair shot unless you're talking about not liking him at Florida State. If you liked him at Florida State, then I still think that there would be a lot of hope to like him here, because keep in mind that Atlanta's offensive line has been putrid for the past 3 to 4 years. I actually cover them at Football Guys a good bit weekly in their weekly recaps, and they've been hurt. They've been banged up, and they've also haven't had, Roddy White hasn't really been healthy for a full season for the past 2 years. They haven't had a tight end who could catch the ball since Tony Gonzalez retired. And so it's just been a one-man show with Julio Jones and Matt Ryan basically fighting for his life to be able to, get the ball off fast, or maybe once or twice a game get a deep ball off to Julio Jones. And so that on paper, that offense looks a lot better than it has been. And they've played competitively, but they've been banged up. I think Freeman is a much more natural zone runner. And I think that he didn't get enough carries for you to really look at him and say that he was that great, that he was one way or the other coming in last year. And you have to also understand that Steven Jackson was a big name that they brought in, and I think that they felt like they wanted to give him that second chance after an injury-riddled season in 2013, and then it just didn't work out, and Freeman actually looked better in numerous opportunities, even though they were limited in each game.
Moving on to the QB position with the RSP, you came up with a great analogy here to quote from the RSP folks. The NFL Combine has the atmosphere of happy hour, and the NFL Draft feels like the bar an hour before closing time, with quarterbacks as the target for the potential hookup. Loved it. So this year specifically, let me ask you, Matt, the first rounders, right? Winston and Mariota. Which one's doing the walk of shame? Is anybody going to be turning their head the other way, saying, I can't believe we took this guy? How do you feel about the 2 first-round quarterbacks?
I like them better this year than I like them. I like Winston this year, and I like Winston as a player overall. I do think, though, that Winston is going to give you moments, give fantasy football owners and fans moments where they are going to go, why on earth did we pick him after he throws a 4-interception game? Because he's going to have, I would imagine he's going to have at least 3 4-interception games, or 3, multiple interception games in his rookie year. But at the same time, I also think he's probably going to have 3 or 4 touchdown games this year, and some of them are going to come at the same time. Some of them are going to come separately, where he's going to look great and like a future all pro, and then a future guy who was a future bust, Ryan Leaf type of bust the next week. And
he's got a little bit of that Brett Favre.
He does. He's a very creative passer, and it's a great dichotomy when you look at Winston and Mariota, because to be a great quarterback in the league, you have to be able to do 2 things. One of these 2 things, either unbelievably well, or you have to have a good blend of both. One of those things is to play within the structure of the play. You have to understand the defense. You have to understand your scheme. You have to know how to adjust quickly before the snap and post snap to make the correct read and play, and do it all with sound technique and fundamentals, so that you're consistent and you're giving your teammates a chance to make plays. Marcus Mariota is that type of player. That's where he's going to have to thrive. People think about his running ability in that wide open Oregon offense, and they think, oh, he's a scrambler. He's not a scrambler. He does not know where to go as a runner nearly as well. He's just got speed. He's a straight line-ish runner, but what he does well is make the quick read, make the quick throw, and understand the play, and be a smart, conscientious, task-oriented quarterback. Now, people will say task-oriented sounds negative. Tom Brady is the ultimate task-oriented quarterback. Steve Young went from being a poor creative quarterback to a great task-oriented quarterback in this league, once he submitted his will to the Bill Walsh system and learning how to play by the numbers that way. Brett Favre, as you mentioned, is a great outside the structure of the play quarterback.
Yeah.
And that's what Jameis Winston is. Now, Brett Favre could still play well enough to learn a West Coast offense under Mike Holmgren, but he was still the guy that when he saw something, he'd veer away from what the play call might have been. He was still the guy that it was 3 years into his career before he understood what a nickel defense was. I literally saw a documentary. He was talking about he didn't even know what a nickel defense meant, and he was a coach's son.
Yeah.
Some of the things that he did on the field before that point would make you go, how the heck did he not know what a nickel defense was? And he was doing that, Right. So Jameis Winston's more that guy. Jameis Winston believes he has that ultimate confidence, that ability to work outside the pocket and make beautiful improvisatory throws on the move to running backs, to tight ends, but he also reads the field well. The problem is he has the confidence to make the type of throws that Brett Favre would try to make. And when you do that, you fail sometimes, But here's the thing. People both types of quarterbacks can be good. If you look at Brett Favre, his weakness was, you knew that 2 to 3 times a game he might make the type of throw that could end your game, and end it for a team, but he might pull you back into the game late because he could make plays that defenses couldn't stop. They'd stop the scheme, but he'd somehow circumvent it with his athleticism and his ability to improvise. Jameis Winston's that kind of guy. Even though there'll be 2 to 3 times a game where you think he believed he could throw it between the defender's numbers and somehow drill the ball through the guy's chest, out his back, and into the receiver's arms, running the crossing route behind him. But at the same time, he has the belief that if he's down 21-0 and threw 3 interceptions, that he can still play well enough to come back. Mariota's not that player. Mariota's more the Tom Brady, where if you get your strategy knocked off, you're knocked off your strategy, the team is able to scheme against you in a way where it limits you, then they become impatient. Then they become, Peyton Manning's the same way. They become impatient. They end up get forced into mistakes. But the better you are at being that type of player, the less often those types of things come around for you. I mean, it's very rare that you're going to knock Peyton Manning off his game. But a good example was that Super Bowl where they lost to the Seattle Seahawks. So when I look at Winston and Mariota, I think that Mariota is probably going to be the guy that's struggling more this year. It's a more complex offense in Tennessee, and he had a simpler offense, and he didn't have to drop back from center, didn't play in a pro-style set. So he's going to have some more adjustments to make, and I don't think he has the same quality of receivers that you're going to see with Winston. And I think that so Mariota may be a little steadier, but not as productive, where I think Winston's going to be more up and down. But he can be a guy that I would rather have Winston as my quarterback 2 this year in redrafts, whereas with Mariota, I'd rather not have him at all.
Gotcha. And well, speaking of Winston, then I was hoping you can weigh in on a recent debate we've been having. You already gave me hopes and came to my side with the Justin Forsett debate. He's one of my men, and I think I'm probably a minority in the Pyro brethren in that stance, but I do love me some Justin Forsett. I'd love to have him as my RB number 2. Speaking of Winston, though, clearly Mike Evans, he's the wide receiver number 1 there. But do you think Vincent Jackson is going to have a bounce-back year with Winston? I rattled off stats. I'm not going to rattle them off again, but we had the anomaly last year of only 2 touchdowns out of the top. I'm going off the top of my head here, but off the top 30 wide receivers last year, he was the most yard dependent for fantasy points. He just didn't get points from touchdowns, and that's the anomaly. In the years before, going back in all of his 6 1,000-yard touchdown or 1,000-yard leagues, he averaged 8 touchdowns. Last year he had 2. So to me, Cam Winston, I think he's going to look to a Vincent Jackson. He's going to look to a veteran. Jackson doesn't run down the field as far as Evans. Winston is not known for throwing it as far down the field. Personally, I think Vincent Jackson is going to benefit. He's going to be behooved by Winston there. How do you see Vincent Jackson's performance once Winston arrives?
I think that the main benefit that you're going to see with a Winston Jackson combo probably is that I think that you're going to see a bounce back in touchdowns. I would agree with that. I think you can get him somewhere in the range of, I think 5 to 7 touchdowns is realistic for Jackson. And I think that that's enough that he may no longer be a top 15 wide receiver in the league, but I think that he can be a top 25 receiver. Give him 1,100 yards and 5 to 6 touchdowns, and he's probably even closer to the top 15 than you would imagine. But I think that, more than anything, it comes down to a quarterback who's willing to spread the ball around. And I think that Jameis Winston is willing to do that. I think that he does read defenses reasonably well. His issue is the blitz. So sometimes he will try to check plays down in the middle of the field where linebackers are dropping and he ends up in bad situations. But I do think as just a matter of is Vincent Jackson healthy enough, young enough, athletic enough still to be able to win deep? Is he still able to win on on contested catches? I think the answer is yes, and I believe that Winston is more likely to make some of those contested throws with confidence than McCown was.
I'm just gonna. I think I won the argument, and thanks to Mr. Waldman, I'm gonna go ahead and talk to my brother's stag party. And you just got Luca Brazzi'd, my friend. Your argument sleeps with the fishes, buddy. Your argument sleeps with the fishes. Moving on, though, real quick, tight ends. Nobody loves a rookie tight end. Max Williams, arguably going to be the best, but I've heard a lot of good stuff coming about Clive Walford. What do you think about these two guys? Who's going to make a bigger impact in redraft versus dynasty?
Well, in redraft right now, Max Williams isn't even starting. It's going to be Crockett Gilmore, and Williams has struggled with picking up the system. So I think that at this stage, you can pretty much write off Williams for at least the first half of the season. And I think that it would probably be wise not even to draft him or consider him as anything more than a waiver wire pick. Walford could be a late round pick, even though Michael Rivera will probably be splitting time with him. But the Raiders seem to be excited about Walford. And Walford does have that athleticism to win the ball in tight coverage. He's certainly a decent blocker, and I think that he can have a little bit more of an impact. He's the guy that in redrafts, if you were in a very deep league or a best ball league where tight ends had a lot of value, he would be worth consideration. But in most standard leagues, neither of those guys I would probably recommend at all. And then in dynasty leagues, I would still give the edge to Williams just because I like the physical tools that he has. But they tend to be 1-2 when it comes to looking at them long term as prospects. A guy that might be worth looking at as a third guy, and I would keep my eye on a little bit more, is Michael Pruitt, who had a nice performance yesterday for the Vikings in the Hall of Fame game. But the story behind Michael Pruitt is a little bit deeper than just that he did well last week. It's the fact that the team wanted to move him around and use him as a fullback, H-back, move tight end. They like that he can block, but they also value the fact that this is a 4.5 40 athlete who has excellent quickness and is very well known for being able to run after the catch with both strength and quickness. And I would recommend Michael Pruitt as a guy to keep an eye on, only because Kyle Rudolph hasn't been able to stay healthy. Chase Ford is an okay guy if you really need him to threaten the seam, but he's not consistent. And the other two guys that they have are really just short range target blockers, who can maybe run the hook route for you occasionally. So Pruitt has the opportunity to possibly be their fullback or be on the field at the same time as Kyle Rudolph. In addition to if Kyle Rudolph gets hurt, I think that they would try and find ways to sub him in. Tight ends traditionally don't do well, as you mentioned, as rookies. Right. But again, that's kind of where I'm looking at these players as they are right now.
Yeah, just to be clear, if you're new, Pyromaniacs, we've said time and time again, don't pick up rookie tight ends unless it's just some star is following him around in the heavens. But you want to avoid them. Mainly, it's going to be in redraft. And I've heard good things about Pruitt, but heck, they've even got Brandon Bostic down in Minnesota from Super Bowl fame or unfame, as it were. Moving on, we've only got a few more moments here with you, and I could shoot the breeze fantasy all night long if the wife would allow it. I mean, I clearly wear the pants in the house. Just don't tell her I said that. As stated before, I'm a stataholic, and you talked about some guys that you go seek out. Chase Stewart, whom I love as well. Chris Brown, I'm going to check out. Emery Hunt is another guy. I was just talking to Pat Thorman, and from PFF, and he was talking about using some Vegas lines. Certainly, we've all known if you're streaming, maybe a defense, you're going to look at the total points over under. But he was looking at some other ways of looking at stat lines, like maybe, for example, Chris Ivory might have a little bit better time this year running. They're predicted to win 7.5 games. The Jets are. They only won 4 last year. Maybe that's an indicator they're going to be running the ball more. I thought it was interesting. Are there any things stat-wise, data points that you really feel impact fantasy?
I think that there are things that I've looked at that I found compelling and interesting. I mean, I've looked at top 12 wide receivers, and I've looked at 10 years of data and noticed that really when you're looking at a large percentage of top 12 receivers had either a second wide receiver in the top 36 or a top 12 tight end also on his team. So it's not a matter of the top 12 wide receiver being the lone target hog who is the black hole of the passing game, but it's a matter of what you would think when you're talking about a balanced offense is that he's going to have productive talent, that surrounds him and takes the pressure off him to be able to get, high leverage looks. So things like that I find interesting.
One thing I've certainly this time of year we're all looking at is camp battles. So are there any camp battles you're particularly looking at? And of course, as a Lions guy, I got to ask you about the Bell Abdullah debate. Where are you falling on that one?
Well, I love Amir Abdullah. He was my number 2 running back overall in the RSP. And so that makes him probably the top running back who is healthy of all the rookie players. I'm a huge fan of his game, and I think that he is going to be more than just a change of pace back. So I think the way I have it right now is I think it's going to be a fairly even split down the line where you're going to see a split in roles between the 2 backs. But it's you can tell already just in the camp rumblings that Abdullah has impressed a great deal with his elusiveness, with his versatility, with his great burst, and they're going to see in these games that he is a tougher runner for his size than a lot of people may project. And there's a big talk about his fumble rates, but I've addressed that. I mean, people look at the high fumble rate that he had, but the first 2 seasons that he played in at Nebraska, he had a ton of fumbles with a small number of carries. And then over the final 2 years where he was the starter and getting high workloads, that rate dropped to a level that was more comparable with the top prospects that he came out with. So I find, it's a little bit misleading to look at his career fumble rate or his total fumbles and say that he was, that he has a huge problem. I still wouldn't be surprised if he puts a few on the carpet, early on, but I don't think that he's going to be labeled I don't think he's going to end up with that label long term. So I look at this and I'd say there's a fairly even split with more receptions coming to Abdullah. And then over the course of the year, I think as long as he stays healthy, you could see him maybe even taking over more first and second down duties and a higher percentage of rotation from Joique Bell. I'm very interested, as we mentioned before, in the Atlanta camp battle for the running back position there. I think that's interesting. I'm interested to see about Johnny Manziel being able to make a full, return to, I would say, mental health, let's put it that way, with his bout with fame, and to actually show something as a quarterback and maybe get a chance to take some time away from Josh McCown by midseason, due to maybe McCown not playing as well, and the likelihood of Manziel continuing to apply his craft and play a little bit better. And I do think that he's the kind of guy, when you talk about Brett Favre and his ability to make plays outside the structure, when you're a young quarterback like McCown, like Manziel or Winston, you have to experiment with what you can and can't do. And that means that you're going to look stupid at times, and people are going to say you can't play very well. when it's really a matter of trying to figure out what you physically and can or can't do at this level of the game. And I think that Manziel, now that he's worked at his craft and he's actually being a professional and practicing and studying hard, I think he's going to get another opportunity down the line, maybe late this year. So, but he's doing well enough in camp right now that he's getting starter reps. So I'm curious to see whether or not that comes earlier than what we expected. After that, I would say the David Cobb Bishop Sankey battle in Tennessee is another one that I'm interested in. I think that David Cobb is a much better running back conceptually, even though he's not nearly as athletic as Sankey was. But I didn't ever like Sankey as a decision maker, and I think that Cobb's already impressing there. And so I'm interested to see how that pans out. So those are a few that come to mind.
Yeah, I've heard with McCown that the analogy was he's an old car that the grandma drives to church on Sunday. He's an older quarterback. I think he was 37, but doesn't have many miles on the tires. And Manziel, they're looking to redshirt him if possible. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but I personally think that would benefit him. He needs to get in some time to learn what it is to be a professional, but I am interested in seeing how that plays out. I just don't think he's got the weapons really around him right now to benefit. The running back, that's not even running back by committee, that's running back by community there. Who knows? Brian Hartline is currently your number 2 on the depth chart. Hausler is probably going to be your tight end. It's going to be a tough one for him. So I personally would like to see him redshirt. But before we let you go, I had some questions I always ask folks. If you were doing, mock drafts, which of course we're all doing these days, trying to prep for a D-Day. I got a little homage to Mike Gordon from Fish. He's got the mock song. So I've got a mock draft question for you. If you were to break it up, basically, give me about 3 names. So if you were to break it up rounds 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 16. The mock drafts you've been doing, give me one guy you've been ending up in with rounds 1 through 5, a guy you've been ending up with rounds 6 through 10, a guy you've been on that's been on your teams in 11 through 16.
Sure. Guys that I've had on, usually 1 through 5, it's either CJ Anderson or Justin Forsett.
Man.
So one of those 2 guys. 6 through 10, I tend to either end up with Ben Roethlisberger or Isaiah Crowell in that range. And then I would say, 11 through 16, guys that Kyle Rudolph tends to be on that list probably, as or Marvin Jones. I'm a big Marvin Jones fan, and I think I usually get him and feel like I'm stealing in round 14 or 15 or 16 or later.
Often forgot about Man. Had the Jones injury, right? He lived up to his name and didn't play much last year, and so I concur. He's going to move right up there with the red rifle thrown to him. Last one for you, sir. Finally, there is a classic song originally performed by Amos Milburn, but probably immortalized by John Lee Hooker. 1 bourbon, 1 scotch, and 1 beer. Along those lines, give me 1 breakout, 1 sleeper, and give me 1 bust.
Yeah, good question. I think John Brown will have a breakout year.
Amen. I love it.
I think the comparisons to Marvin Harrison are closer to on point than what you would imagine. I want to nickname him Hind Parts because I think his explosion and agility is the only thing that defenders are going to see from him is his hind parts on a regular basis. So that would be my breakout player. A sleeper. I think that as a sleeper goes, I think Jacob Tamme is an interesting player because the Falcons really, when their offense thrives, and even when Kyle Shanahan's offense thrives, they have a good H-back. And listen, Tony Moyaki, or how you pronounce his name, I can't remember, Tony Moki, I think. He was a very good player at Iowa. but he can't stay healthy, and he's kind of a shadow. He only shows flashes of that athletic ability now. Levine Toilolo, the tight end for the Falcons earlier, the past couple of seasons, is a big guy who I thought would have been better as a left tackle convert than as a tight end. He's just not fluid enough to make plays or make contested plays, and he doesn't. He's big and he's strong, but that's about it there. So Tammy, to me, and the Falcons really like him, could end up being that 60 catch player for them, because as much as they talk about Leonard Hankerson doing well in camp, Roddy White, to me, I love Roddy White. I love how he plays. But if he can't stay healthy, he's already had a knee drained. He's already, if he can't stay healthy, you're going to end up seeing Hankerson in there, probably subbing for White. I also don't expect Hankerson. I'll believe it when I see Hankerson under the lights actually play well, rather than just playing well in practice. So to me, Tammy is an experienced veteran who's going to do well in the middle of the field, and that's going to help out Matt Ryan a ton when they have a player who can play the short intermediate seam and not just catch 5-yard passes, but 15, 20-yard passes down the middle. And that will help out the other players. So Tammy, to me, is that sleeper. And then a guy who I guess would be I don't want to say bust, but a guy that I would be leery of a bit. I think I'm going to be leery of LeSean McCoy. I think that the one thing the Eagles do very well is when it comes to analytics, they do a lot with GPS tracking. And I was told by someone who was in the know at one time that they traded LeSean McCoy because they knew they'd get value from him, and he was still a good player. But last year, a lot of what they attribute to his production dip was a lack of burst. And that his burst had declined significantly enough that they saw it noticeably in their measurements of his GPS data. And I think that you combine that where he's still a good player, a very good player, but with Rex Ryan's system. And Rex Ryan, to me, has been the ultimate dysfunctional offensive manager for whoever he's had coaching for him, where he loves to switch up running back carries. He loves to bench guys at certain points. He doesn't seem to help his team offense get into a flow. And I could totally see where McCoy has a few bad carries. Ryan orders him to get sit on the bench for a little bit or sit on the sideline, and just a whole bunch of chaos ensues, and this team's ability to produce goes down the drain. I don't think that McCoy's going to turn out to be like an epic bust, but I would say maybe he's a low end running back 2 at best, instead of being that top 15 player people expect. I still have him projected that high, but when it's time to draft, I'm usually drafting a receiver, or I find another back, and I'm not as high on McCoy as I used to be.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't think, he was running not the way Chip Kelly wanted. He was running side to side, and I don't know if he's going to get it done there. They're going to stack the box against him. I love the JB call. I am all about him now. Here's the stat thing for you. I checked 3 different sites. I looked up when Carson Palmer, and if memory serves me, he played in games, I think 6 games, 1, and then like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks last year. Looked up 3 different sites to see the targets to John Brown, Fitzgerald, and Floyd. 3 different sites, 3 different numbers. But essentially, 2 out of the 3 agreed that when Carson Palmer was playing, his favorite receiver was John Brown. So to go with Roto World, 43 targets to John Brown in that time, Fitzgerald 39, Michael Floyd 28. Fitzgerald in that time only had 1 TD. John Brown had 3. I really like John Brown this year. I think they're going to be able to do a lot with him. So that cat excites me quite a bit. I'm looking forward to it. Matthew, it has been my great pleasure, sir. I wish we could do this all night. I just love talking ball.
It was a lot of fun, Mo. I appreciated it a great deal, and I'm looking forward to doing it again at some point. The time passed very quick.
Hey, I would love to revisit with you as the season progresses, see what's going on. Folks, you can follow him again, Matt Waldman at MATTWALDMAN. He is responsible for the RSP, the rookie scouting portfolio. Catch him on the Audible with Football Guys. You've heard me talk to Sigmund. They've got Cecil Lammy. They've got just some fantastic guys. They've got the doctor on staff. Really knowledgeable stuff. And it's really been my pleasure, and always enjoy talking football with you, Matt. Thank you so much, sir.
Hey, thank you. My pleasure.
Pyromaniacs, this has been another fantasy football talk. As always, you can catch me and Stags when we do our Pyro Light podcast. Once the season gets going, we're going to be broadcasting on Fridays. As always, we've got the Pyro Heavy podcast. Both of these are coming out every week, 52 weeks a year. We've got the free website. We are also now building the Pyro Pro, which is very customizable to your teams. We've got the draft kit for 20 bones. We are about to release version 5. We will also have version 6 that comes out. If you buy one, you get the next one free. Stay tuned. We're putting up videos. We're doing interviews. We are firing all sorts of goo at you. So until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is PyromaniacMo. You can catch me on Twitter, PyromaniacMo. You can follow the boys at Pyromaniac on Twitter, which is just PYROMAN, the number 1 AC. It's been a pleasure, and we will see you on the flip side.